Welcome to our third episode of the Improving at Warmachine series. We're on to our third topic today. This is going to cover list selection and some pregame conversations. My name's Ryan. I used to be good at Warmachine. Welcome to Spell Rack. Once you've made it through the process of actually building a core list that you really like, you've modified it, and then you pick the complementary list to go with it, you're more likely to go play against opponents either for fun at a game night or go to a local tournament or travel for a tournament. And you're going to end up in an instance where you need to work through a list pairing and list selection. So let's talk about that a little bit, and then the sort of pregame conversations that I always have with my opponents. List selection, very much easier said than done. I'm actually going to lean on one of my future topics here real quick, and that is on number 10 here, which will be in much more in-depth video, is kind of understanding the meta. You need to kind of build a gauntlet as you're building your list pair. So what I've done here is I've cycled through who are the most common warcasters and warlocks in each of our factions, and you need to know and understand what they do so you know what list to pick. And what you're going to be looking for is in your list pair, you're going to want to have an ideal answer to all of these casters. Not an answer that you're going to necessarily win, but an answer that you have a game to play against. Let's look at Kythos, for example. Kythos is going to be a big deal with that feat. -3 to attack rolls. He's likely to have Nastia in with awe. There's annoyance on models. The question is, what are you going to do against that? So if you see a Crix player, they've got Kythos in their pairing. The question is, are you about to windmill slam your Kythos pair? Or do they see your Kythos matchup coming and they're able to decide, well, they've got an answer for my Kythos list. I'll have to drop my other list. And that's where, we kind of call list chicken. It's not really list chicken, but it's a game. It's a game of strategy. It's why I believe that all of your lists should be well-rounded, is because if you have a list that's designed to be Kythos and they drop their other list, your list still has to be able to flex a little bit and play that other game. Now, if you do have your Kythos list that beats it, great, drop it, they put it down, and you see how that game goes. But I think in selecting your list, it's going to come down to knowing and understanding the limitations of your lists. They might have a list that's a double colossal or some sort of armor skew, and maybe only one of your lists can answer that list. Maybe you end up being forced, because if they drop that list and you drop your anti-armor list, you're fine. If you drop your other list, maybe it's a skew you get handled, you get absolutely demolished. And Kythos is kind of the same way. He's just more of a defense skew than an armor skew. So you don't want to get, just automatic loss or like something where you have a 30% chance of winning. So you are, generally, in my perspective, I am looking at that list that is the most problematic for me, and I'm going to play to counter that. And if they play the other list, that's where I rely on well-rounded lists and experience to try to get around it. If they're playing their second list, right, if they were planning on Kythos against you, but you have an anti-Kythos list, it's likely that second list of theirs isn't tailored to beat you anyway. So you're both off kilter a tiny bit. And then you play that game. There's not really anything to plan for going first, going second. You should have an understanding of matchups and how your army wants to go first or second. But I wouldn't pick a list based on, I need to go first or second with this list. Pay attention to the matchups, pay attention to what's in your lists, what's in their lists, and I would go from there. Okay, so once you pick your lists, let's talk about some of the pregame conversations and pregame selections. Obviously, first thing up is going to be your spell rack. So say you've picked your answer list and they picked their off list. And so now you're both kind of playing a game where I'm playing my anti-Kythos and they're playing their Decathos list. And it's just, you're just going to both figure it out now. Okay. So now you got to look at their list and figure out, what does your base list do right? And what does it do well? And what does it need help with? Do they have a lot of warjacks? Do they have a lot of warjacks that are armor 18? Because in that case, maybe you don't need armor cracking. It depends on what your list looks like. If you've got a bunch of POW 10s, being able to do -2 armor somewhere might be helpful. Being able to give +2 damage to a unit might be very helpful. Do they have a lot of defense? Do you need a map fixer? Do you need some utility spells? Can you take Hex Blast and knock an Arcane Shield off of a Colossal in Signar? Look at your spell rack, and you got to figure out what your deficiencies are and if you can answer the issues that are presented in front of you. Once you have your spell rack, and this early game conversation that I'm about to talk about, this could happen while you're doing your spell rack, okay? Because it would inform maybe some of your decisions. And it might be that you need to have this conversation after the spell rack because their spell rack is going to change their answers. And so, what am I really talking about here? I always ask my opponents, walk me through your threat ranges, right? What are your threat ranges of your models? I see here you have a speed 6 heavy with 2-inch reach that threats 11 inches. That's easy. Do you have any way to speed that up? I have to ask that question. Absolutely have to ask that question. Do you have any way to speed this model up? You threat 11. If you end up with Redline that gives you +2 speed, now it's a 13-inch threat range. If I don't account for that and I put my models up and my opponent surprises me, that's on me. That's my problem for not asking about the speed up. There's an old Umbry caster, one of the new ones, the Sniper. If she hits you, her beast charged with +2 speed. Maybe they have Rush in faction. Maybe they have Escort. There's a lot of different ways to gain threat extension. Maybe there's Vengeance, right? Stuff like that. But so I always ask the question, do you have ways to speed your models up? Do you have ways to enhance your threat? And when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about melee. So I'm worried about charges. You do also want to ask the question of what range guns are we looking at, right? If they've got a couple of heavies, with range 12 POW 15s or range 14 POW 15s, it's different. It allows you to know where you need to keep your caster and stuff like that, or where some of your heavies go or your cavalry models. And those threat ranges will significantly inform that. The other thing I want to know is, can you knock off upkeep spells? If I want to take a +2 armor buff for my Colossal, I want to know that it's not just quickly and trivially removed. And so I need to figure out what's there. Do they have anti-healing? And is that relevant to you? If you have some models that are tough, that might really matter. There's some lists where anti-healing can really mess somebody up, or it could be a big part of their game plan. Looking at Shadowflame Shard with the Chimera tricks, right? It heals every turn. So if I'm a Shadowflame Shard player, every game I'm asking, can you stop healing on my Colossal? It's a huge, huge game-changing point that changes how you're going to play that game significantly. I do tend to ask what models have stealth so that I can try to make a record of stuff I can shoot safely. I'm going to ask about Pathfinder sometimes, or if they have access to Ghostly, so that I know if they're, coming through any buildings or forests unexpectedly. You're also going to want to ask about some of their debuffs. Do they have ways to debuff your armor or debuff your defense? If they don't have an armor debuff and they don't have a POW buff, then maybe you feel more comfortable putting a heavy in a certain situation. And so a lot of that stuff's going to matter. If you're playing a lot of infantry, you're going to need to know if they have berserking models. Do they have berserk and overtake? A lot of the questions you ask are going to be very dependent on what your list cares about. If you don't have a lot of infantry models, you don't care about berserk. You don't care about overtake. If you're not putting about upkeeps, then you don't care if they can strip upkeeps. If you're playing a very careful threat range game, then you definitely care how much they can speed up their model. You really need to be thinking about, what doesn't my list want to see, and how do I approach this game so that I can ask these questions? Another one might be, do you have any way of stopping charges? Some Signar models allow constructs to not be able to charge. You could have a spell like Stranglehold or something that has Shadowbind that could cause issues. You need to know about those pieces too. If your opponent has ways of stopping magic attacks, like the Chimera tricks can spend a Fury and negate a spell. Tiras can do the same thing. In Dusk, there are utility solos that the utility unit that deals with Warjacks can give out spell wards. A lot of other factions have access to spell wards. The point is, make sure you're thinking about your list. Make sure you're thinking about where your weaknesses could lie, and make sure you get those questions out there so that you know what you're expecting and you don't get gotcha. Another really great one is like Huxley. Understand what Huxley can do. Huxley can trample a Warjack and then Repo 5 and then Jackhammer with full throttle. That's just something you're going to need to know. And these are questions like as we go into this list down here, these are all little like you're going to need to know individual things. You're going to need to know Vilkul's threat range as he goes through his clouds. You're going to need to know how to deal with Horus and an armor feat. You know, there's a lot of stuff in here that you're going to need to know. But the more general stuff is asking you about threat ranges and ways to stop charges and lower speeds and defenses and armors and all that stuff. So don't just YOLO it and go in and say, look, I'll deal with it as it comes. I'm going overboard right now so that you get kind of a collection of questions. But generally, it's going to be 3, 4, 5 questions that I end up asking my opponents that really helps me to get started in the game, and it'll help me to how I approach engagement. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching again. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.